Hi everyone, I can see you're all just coming in now. We'll just give you about 30 seconds, a minute to make sure all your audio is connected and give some time for any last minute people to come in. All right, well, I think we might still have a few people joining us, but we'll get started. Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar today. Just a few things happening on the screen. Obviously, welcome to the webinar. We just ask you to keep your video off and stay on mute for the duration of the webinar. If you want to ask a question, we'll be having a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar, so just send the message through chat until then. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our Non-Executive Director of ABSIA, Ian Gibson, to welcome everyone and introduce our guest today, who is Gagana Windsor from Unisys.
Thanks, Maggie. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to start the webinar by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands in which we all meet today. We would like to pay our respects to them and their cultures and to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, to move to the webinar today, I'd like to introduce Gagana. I've actually known Gagana for several years, and she's a wonderful speaker, so I'm sure we're going to be entertained today. She's currently the Industry Director of Cybersecurity in charge of Australia and New Zealand at Unisys. Gagana comes with a strong account management and business growth background. She has a passion for business and complex problem solving. Her involvement in IT and security industry led her to be the president of the ICT chapter of the Australian India Business Council, and many of you might remember her from there. ISICA, the Sydney board member, and then more recently, the Australian Information Security Association committee member. Gagana is definitely a passionate advocate and thought leader for cybersecurity. I know that from the years that I've known her, and she's also a strong role model for female leadership. She's been a keynote speaker and panelist in several industry-related events and also leading conferences. So today I'd like to welcome Gagana, and I'll hand it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Maggie. Thanks everyone for having me today. It's definitely a pleasure. And yeah, we've known each other for a very long time, Ian. It is true. I would like to start today's session with asking a couple of questions. And I don't know how familiar you are with Zoom by now, I guess very familiar. But there is a button on the right-hand side, especially if you're using a laptop, with reactions. So if you click on the reactions, you can choose thumbs up or an applause button. And I would like you to put your thumbs up if you have heard recently about all the different hacks that are happening in the country and whatever is going on right now at a cyber level. Let's see how many of you have put your thumbs up. Yeah, perfect. That's exactly right. Excellent. So that is the case, and for the ones of you who do not know me or who have not met me, I have been in the IT industry for about 15 years now, coming from Italy, from enterprise resource planning and software as a service. So I had to deal with problems similar to the one that you have to face on a daily basis as ABSIA members. And I have gone into cybersecurity because it is an industry that inspires me, given the fact that it can allow organizations to protect people's data, because eventually that's what we do. We look at protecting people's data. I'm going to start sharing my screen now, and
should be all good to share your screen now.
Excellent. Let's see if that works. And introduce the topic of today for you all. So we have decided to talk about increasing cyber resilience, because if you want to put it on a level of, you know, health, for example, as an analogy, if we use health, what is really good when it comes down to resilience of our immune system is that if we have a resilient immune system, no matter how many germs, viruses, bacteria attack us, we can very quickly recover. The same thing is valid for cyber. Whatever happens, if you are resilient, then you will be able to very quickly respond to the threats and then as a consequence, recover. So hence, cyber resilience is an extremely important topic and can allow organizations such as yours to have a better way to respond and recover immediately after having suffered the cyber attack. Now, COVID-19 has been obviously a very huge disruptor for many industries, and obviously including our industry, your industry. And it has created thousands of concerns for employees and changed the way we work. And yeah, that's something, it's a phrase that I found from Forrester, which says, we weren't exactly ready. So 68% of the Australians were working from home during the initial part of the pandemic. Unfortunately, we're now facing a second part. And 42% of Australian businesses expect to permanently maintain working from home workforce. Why I'm sharing this with you when we talk about cyber resilience and what that means to you is that you would be subject to all the threats and all the different issues that can arise by you having your employees working from home. There would be a single point of failure, which is the VPN, which we all have been using, no matter what's going on. And there will be issues related to bringing your own device, issues related with saving data on people's own devices, etc., etc. But I'll dive into that a little bit more later. The most important thing that I wanted to set the stage for you today is that you're going to learn a few practical, tactical, but also strategic steps on how to build and maintain cyber resilience, which we have just established is a very important topic to have. So as a cyber presentation, we had to include a hoodie. We could have not missed having someone looking like a hacker wearing a hoodie. So this is the one. But why I'm sharing it is because cyber attacks will still happen and regulators will still regulate no matter what's happening with COVID and no matter what's happening with the industries all over the world. Those two things will keep happening. And unfortunately for us in Australia, there has been more and more cyber attacks happening last few months, more than ever before, to the point where the Prime Minister, as you all agreed initially, has said to us that we have recently become a victim of cyber attacks, state-sponsored cyber attacks. As you probably know and can connect to that, cyber attacks can be of two types. One can be malicious and for the purpose of making money or making profit for cyber criminals. And the second one can be for collecting data or disrupting the systems of a certain country because they have been ordered, so to speak, by state-sponsored cyber attacks. So I'm showing you a few logos here just to kind of bring the conversation to reality, to what has been occurring in our country in the last few months. And again, I would like you to raise your hand or put your thumbs up if you're aware of any of those particular attacks or if you have read in the media about those attacks. Yeah, I can see a few people raising their hands. Absolutely, yeah. It is a real issue and it's still happening. So what is important to know and what is important to understand when it comes down to cyber resilience and also to cyber attacks? I have put together a couple of concepts and a couple of very useful tips and tricks for you to take home. If you want, you can take a note on those. I saw somebody was asking before in the chat if we will be sharing this presentation. I have no issues to share the presentation with Upsy team and Maggie. Correct me if I'm wrong. I can flip it over to you. I can send it to you, and you can then share it with the rest of the participants in the webinar. That's not going to be a problem. But diving into it, awesome. Thank you, Maggie. Thanks for that. So diving into it, there are two important points. Number one, have I been hacked? And number two, if I have been hacked, how can I stop it? So in this case scenario, have I been hacked comes down to 3 important steps that you can take in order for you to establish whether or not you have been hacked. And number 1 happens to be do your research. Like everything, we have to do our own research and understand what threats are actually facing our own industry, facing our own organization. There will be threats that are connected to people, technology, processes, etc. But the Australian Cybersecurity Centre has recently published a beautiful document that I can actually send to you alongside with the white paper. I can send that to Maggie actually, which includes very specific and very thorough information that you can, number 1, share with your cybersecurity auditors, share with your internal cybersecurity team if you have one. And if you don't have one, you can share it with your partners and third-party providers that provide IT to you as well, right? So that would show you what kind of threats are potentially at the moment faced, what kind of threats are facing your industry, right? I got distracted because someone was trying to join. So welcome to the newcomers. Step number two is to perform a compromise assessment. But also a perform a compromise assessment can mean multiple things. So number 1, perform a compromise assessment. And why is that important is because you want to know what exactly is happening in your environment after you have done your research. So you want to be sure that something is really happening. And within that perform a compromise assessment, you can choose to hire a company to come and do that for you, which I would personally recommend because the internal teams usually are very busy with tactical items and with protecting the environment. If they have to perform an assessment, sometimes it might not be necessarily successful. So having a third party that does that for a job would be very, very powerful for you to get the objectives that you want to get. So you can also perform something called threat hunting and red teaming. You can also have a blue team, which will be the protection team, and the red team will be trying to constantly attack your systems and act as a malicious attacker, where the blue team is trying to protect and to detect those threats and protect the systems. So the 2 teams together can be called purple team. But I'm not going to bore you with too many details. You can find out information with any particular pen testing company that can help you out with that endeavor. And this is extremely important, connected also to the fact that I know some of you are regulated and have to comply with PCI DSS, for example. If that is your case, you probably have to do penetration testing every 6 months. So having red teaming and blue teaming exercises done can be extremely beneficial. Another very important point that I want to raise here within the perform a compromise assessment part is that you can also look for something called dark market scanning. And that can give you an idea of how much data is out there on your organization within the dark market. And there are specific tools that you can gauge, you can use to do that. I know for a fact we have done simple exercise like dark market scanning recently for a client of ours, which is a bank. And they found that there were, for example, fake Facebook accounts opened under their name. They have found a number of credit cards being sold on the dark market with obviously their brand. And they had the possibility and the ability to take that information off the dark market and to, number 1, purchase it and delete it. And number 2, also understand a bit more like, it's more like a forensic investigation, understand who was doing that, what were their motives, and was it driven by malicious actors trying to make profit, or was it driven by competition? Because that can also be the case in some instances, depending upon the type of organization and the type of business you are in. And then potentially and eventually, but most importantly, think about the threats that you are hunting. Many organizations, especially when it comes down to cyber, think, you know, I have my vulnerability assessment done, I know my vulnerabilities. But unless you are able to link your vulnerabilities with your threats that are facing your particular industry, your particular environment, you're not going to know the likelihood, and hence you're not going to be able to evaluate the risks associated to your particular environment. So that's why threat hunting and threat understanding is so important. Moving on, step number 3 on have I been hacked? Plan. And what that means is have an incident response plan, because if you have not been hacked, consider that you might get hacked very soon. Or if you have not been hacked, consider that you might not know that you have been hacked, but you have been hacked. So be prepared. No matter what happens, incident response planning will always be very important. For example, with the coronavirus that has just hit us, obviously it hit us a bit 6 months ago, it's not just, but still, it changed the way we work. It changed everything about how we perceive threats, how we perceive incidents. And most of the organizations, not to mention probably 95 to 99% of the organizations, didn't have an incident response plan that included pandemic, obviously, because that was never on our radar. So incident response planning is extremely important. It would give you the ability to respond and as a consequence to uplift your resilience, as we were talking about before. So how to stop it? If I have been hacked, how do I stop it? Number one, cover the basics. Cover the basics means simply understand what are the hackers targeting within your environment and why would they be targeting it? Usually, in most instances, is data. They're looking for data. They're looking for some sort of data because the data is a currency. So understand your data. That's what cover the basics basically means. Once you have understood your data, make sure that you classify it. And I know it may sound like a very difficult thing to do, but is the thing to do in order for you to really understand how to protect yourself. Because unless you know your data, you're not going to know how to protect it. Unless you know where your data sits, you're not going to know how much to invest to protect your assets, right? So cover the basics is understand your assets, understand your data, but also do asset discovery. Do you have shadow IT? And if you do, how does it look like? What can I do to protect it, right? So number one, cover the basics. Number two, take an attack-based approach to security. And I'm going to dive into that very shortly, a little bit deeper. And I'm going to show you something very interesting, which is the anatomy of a cyber attack and kind of unveil how does it look like when a cyber attack happens and occurs, like what usually happens, what are the steps. So I'm going to cover that in a minute, but take an attack-based approach to security. And to put it in practical terms, what that means is that you are looking at your environment from the eyes of a hacker, from the eyes of someone who's trying to create damage or to steal data or to, fulfill their malicious intentions, so to speak. And then number three, get strategic. This one is one of my favorites because it gives you the ability to strategize. And when we talk about strategy, getting strategic in cyber doesn't mean that you have to differ from your organizational strategy. Actually, your cyber strategy, cyber protection, cyber detection, cyber response and recovery strategy should be part of your overall organizational strategy. That is why it's so important to be able to relate to different types of standards. For example, if you're working with government, you would have the Information Security Manual or ISM. You would have essential aids. If you're working with the financial sector and you deal with credit card or debit card information, you would have PCI DSS. But in general, no matter what you do, you would have to have some sort of a mechanism to strategize about the future and what's going to be more effective and efficient for you. So one of those ways is to actually also have potentially a really well done risk assessment, right? Because when you have a risk assessment, you would be able to then communicate based on those risks to your board and understand what exactly needs to be improved, what exactly needs to be tweaked, what exactly needs to be built from scratch, et cetera, et cetera. So get strategic. And I'm trying to move my slides. So let's get to the point of the anatomy of a cyber attack, which is what I promised to you before. And how does it all start? Here at the bottom, you would see email, web attack, plus malware download. So this is when you would receive, or one of your employees would receive a link with an attachment, or it would receive something else. And the moment the user opens or clicks or downloads that particular link or that particular attachment, they unfortunately download either a virus or a malware. And when they download the malware, the next thing that happens is that there is something called local machine takeover. And that usually means that the attackers now are able to take control over your particular laptop or your particular machine or the user's laptop and machine. So once they have obtained that particular control, what they're aiming to do is they're aiming for something called privilege escalation. And privilege escalation means, like, if I am, for example, working in HR and I don't have, privileges to look into accounting or to look into sales, they would look for the accounting or the sales or even the admin internal roles and the admin credentials to be able to escalate their privileges and be able to go sideways, to go laterally within the environment and find out obviously different things and different types of data that they're trying to exfiltrate. Indeed, the next part of the anatomy of a cyber attack is the data exfiltration. So once they have found the data, they're trying to copy that particular data to a location where they have a control. So let's see how we're tracking with regards to time, so I don't want to bore you too much. But raise your hands once again so I can see you are engaged if you have received any kind of suspicious email or suspicious attachment in the last 3 months. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Same with me. I keep receiving those ones, which is very interesting because it shows me that they can go even through the most sophisticated systems, because at Unisys we have extremely sophisticated systems for security. We are a defense-grade security company, right? So even in that case scenario, we keep having those. But interestingly enough, our CISO is a very progressive man. So he keeps sending us those in order to check constantly how are we tracking and how many people actually jump into it and click on the wrong link, so to speak. So it's a constant improvement. Once you know that this is how it works, you have to put processes in place and techniques in place to make sure that your employees are not clicking on those emails. So they're aware not to open attachments and all that kind of stuff. So it is extremely important, and it all comes down to the human element as well. That is why we have decided to call it anatomy of a cyber attack. So there are different paths to resilience. And as I mentioned before, if you already have been implementing ISM, if you have already been implementing PCI DSS, you already have some sort of a basic maturity, or you have some sort of a baseline maturity level, or you might be even further down the track and you might have managed security level if you are compliant with PSF or our ISM, etc. So it depends where you are in your journey. If you have NIST, you might be on adaptive level, which I would be like really, really happy for you about, because that's very difficult to achieve. But bottom line, there are different ways to skin the cat. So different paths to resilience, like similar to health. I would put the analogy back to health. There are different ways for you to be healthy. You may decide to do yoga, you may decide to do weight lifting, you may decide to do swimming, but bottom line, you'll be exercising to keep your immune system up and to keep strong. It is the same thing with cybersecurity. But one thing is where the experts come together, and that has been in the last few years the buzzword called zero trust. I'm sure many of you have heard about it. Actually, thumbs up if you have heard about zero trust before. Okay, I can see a few hands up and a few thumbs up. Brilliant. So zero trust is a way for you to achieve cyber resilience. Look at it from a pragmatic standpoint, because many vendors out there may try to sell something telling you that's going to give you zero trust. That's never the case. Zero trust, as everything in cybersecurity, is always technology, people, and processes. It's never just one technology that would do it all. However, zero trust also means that you are assuming that no system or no identity within your organization can be trusted. And as a consequence, you have to create things around those accesses to make sure that you can trust them and allow them access that they need. Or in other words, have a business justification of why someone should be accessing something and working with that type of data. So I have put some interesting concepts here for you to kind of bring it all together and give you that feel for what zero trust could look like. So number one, know your network. Know and control your network, because unless you know and control your network, you're not going to know how to actually prevent or how to protect yourself from cyber attacks. Actually, prevention, let's put it that way, does not exist. Where in the health world, if you prevent you practice prevention to prevent yourself from having diseases and from contracting any health issues. With regards to cyber, that does not exist as a concept. You cannot prevent. So the only other option you have is to learn how to control. And in order for you to do that, number one is always visibility, 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 know your network. That is why I have put that point over there. Number two would be encrypt the data in motion. So make sure that whatever data has been transmitted within your organization, in and out of the organization, between the different applications, between the users, that data is actually encrypted in motion. Why is that important? Because we have always been using VPNs, right? Except for us at Unisys, we have our internal IP systems. But if you're using a VPN, what that means is that there is a potential for someone to attack that VPN and sniff the data out of there. But if that data is encrypted, they're not going to be able to do anything with it. So that's why encrypt the data in motion. Make sure that that data is encrypted and is rendered unusable by hackers. Then irrefutable identity, which is what I was talking to you about before. So why is identity so important is because whoever pretends to be somebody else, they can get data out of your environment. So by making the identity of the people who are accessing your network irrefutable, you would be able to mitigate those risks and to create that particular control over the identities that enter your environment. So you could authenticate with MHFA, so also with multi-factor authentication, MFA, or you could authenticate with physical and behavioral biometrics. There are multiple things to skin, multiple ways to skin the cat. You could choose the one that is more relevant to you, to your environment, to your business, because obviously if you have a small business, then there's no point boiling the ocean. But if you are dealing with critical assets, critical data, secret data, classified data, then obviously having those controls would be extremely vital and important to you. Then we go to cloak critical assets. And what that means, cloaking is a concept that exists in the military world. And we at Unisys have obviously adopted it because we work with defense quite a lot all over the world, the Five Eyes. And cloaking basically means that you're able to cryptographically hide and render invisible the targets that are present in your network. So for example, all your laptops or all your servers would be rendered invisible. And why is that important is because you cannot hack what you cannot see. So they cannot be seen, right? Then easy zero trust. Why do we say easy zero trust is because you need to know how to reduce your attack surface across all the different types of environments you might have. Because today, obviously, we have multi-cloud, we have at least one cloud, on-premises infrastructure, all the different devices, the BYOD, et cetera, so we need to make sure that we're reducing the attack surface. And that can be done through cloaking the critical assets and obviously enabling the encryption of the data in motion, et cetera. And then eventually enable adaptive security. That's another buzzword that I particularly like because what it does, it talks about how you can integrate what you already have to your different systems and create that ability to correlate and then be able to detect and respond meaningfully. So for example, if you're using one of our products, for example, Stealth, and you're using a security incident event management system, or in other words, SIEM, you would be able to correlate that data and be able to do something called dynamic isolation, or isolate the targets that have been compromised. So let's say my computer have been compromised and there is malware on it. Because of the system Unisys has, they are able to isolate my laptop and do not allow me access to the critical data that I have access to otherwise. Wonderful. So I have been speaking for quite a long time. Maybe Maggie, you can tell me how long we have left, because I am now open for questions.
Excellent, thank you. We have about 10 minutes. We do have a couple of questions that were sent in early. But before we do that, just wanted to comment on something that you mentioned, which is around VPNs. I'm not sure how many people realize, but there is a review that was done about the end of last year that highlighted the fact that many of particularly the free VPNs, are in fact developed by Chinese companies. Now, obviously I'm not paranoid, but when people use VPN programs, they might want to look at who's actually providing them. I thought there was a really interesting discussion around the threats and what happens when you get hacked. I suppose one of the questions that did spring to mind, Gugana, was if something like that happens, what's the first thing that an entity should do, like as fast as possible?
That's a very good question, Ian. And there are different things. So, for example, if you have a regulatory body that is regulating you, clearly you have to be able to also communicate to them. But the first thing, as fast as possible, would be to inform the board. Because obviously the board needs to know what the risks are. There are some liabilities and obligations to be met. So the board would be the first particular body that needs to be informed. And then from there on, what needs to be done immediately is start an investigation, isolate or stop or shut down the systems that are being compromised, that you know of that are being compromised, right? So these are the first few steps. And why is that important is because unless you have that internal accountability and responsibility, to bring it forward and to be able to make informed decisions, you're not going to know as a company what to do. And, I know actually of executives who have lost their jobs because there was an incident and they did not communicate to the board straight away.
Okay. As a director, I'm glad to hear you say that.
I am sure.
Now, as many people on the call would know, ABSIA did a survey earlier this year where they found that 66% of respondents believed that attitudes towards cybersecurity had changed as a result of working from home. But I just wondered, given your experience, what are you seeing? Are you seeing something similar, or are you seeing a different response?
Yeah, that's again a very good question. There has been different situations where we thought people are going to lose it completely because there have been a lot of attacks given the fact that people work from home. So we had actually an accounting firm calling us because we have an investigation arm at Unisys, right? So this accounting firm gave us a ring and said, we had somebody calling one of our head accountants and telling them that they were from Telstra and told them to open their laptop and log into his system. So they had to do some maintenance because his internet, those people said to the accountant that the system was going to be hacked, and they knew about it because they were monitoring the network. So that person opened the laptop and entered into the system, and guess what? This was not a maintenance call. So he saw something weird was going on the screen. He had no idea what was actually going on, but bottom line, they were getting hacked. And these are the kind of things that we have to think about when we work from home. People will be always the weakest link. People will always make mistakes. So as cybersecurity professionals, we need to minimize the ability of people to make mistakes while enabling them to do their job to their best ability even more. So if you want to put it that way, we are in a way enablers. And these kind of situations will keep happening. We also had issues with the health sector, like for example, a few hospitals were hacked at the height of, preparing for response to COVID in Australia and New Zealand. And that's obviously, that's not going to stop the criminals, right? So we have to be aware that those kind of situations will occur. We have to be prepared for them, hence build cyber resilience. Not aim to stop necessarily or to prevent attacks, because as I said before, there's no way we can prevent them. They will keep happening. But it's a question of rather build that resilience, build that muscle, make sure that we have the ability to respond.
Yeah, and in support of that, I saw a survey that came out of the US in March that I think they said that the first month, the number of vulnerabilities that had been reported had doubled. And so, I think everyone sees evidence regularly that that's occurring.
Yeah.
Given the, obviously Unisys is a large company, as you've mentioned, gets involved in defence and other exercises. What are you seeing as being the key trends that are occurring at the moment? Perhaps, the ones that you're able to share as distinct from the ones that you're not able to share.
Well, one of the buzzwords that has been around, that's a really good question as well. So first of all, I wanted to address what you mentioned before about the vulnerabilities. Up until 2014, we had about 8,000 vulnerabilities known worldwide. And you guys are in the software industry. Obviously, the biggest vulnerabilities come into software, right? Like they will always be in software. So what is very interesting to me is how from 2014 up until now, we have tripled, quadrupled, like, I don't even know, quintupled. How do you say 5 times?
Oh,
English?
5 times will do.
5 times. So we have seen a huge increase of vulnerabilities around the world. And that has been pretty concerning because the more vulnerabilities we have, the more there will be avenues to exploit those vulnerabilities. That is why I was talking about being able to connect the threats to the vulnerabilities to establish the risk. Because if you don't do that, you'll just be trying to fulfill some sort of a patching mechanism and patch systems and all that kind of stuff. By the way, one thing I didn't speak about is patching, but patching is extremely important. Being able to have a meaningful patching practice within the organization would make the whole difference in the world, right? So patching is extremely important. And then with regards to what you were asking me before, I actually have prepared something for today's participants. What I have prepared is we are at Unisys, we are happy to offer for the first 5 companies that reach out to you, Maggie, and to you, Ian, we are happy to offer a one-on-one 30-minute consultation around cybersecurity risk and resilience and give them some pointers on how they can optimize what they already have. So we're happy to do that as a service to the community of obviously of the software industry, because we ourselves consider ourselves as part of that community, given that we are a system integrator and we bring all the different softwares together and make them work together in a meaningful way. And to answer your question from before, what we have seen happening very much in the country is that desire to bring the controls high, that desire to increase the cybersecurity posture of the organizations. And I've been in the industry since 2012 in Australia. And what I have discovered so far is that there has been a huge uptake in improving cybersecurity in general. When I look back in 2013, 2014, barely few people knew about PCI DSS, barely few people were doing penetration testing on a yearly basis. Now it is becoming commodity more and more. And I'm very pleased to see that. So all the different agencies in Australia, but also around the world, based on the work we are doing, are looking at improving that capability, that resilience. Another important thing that they are developing as well, alongside with ourselves, is the ability to also implement something called offensive security. So not just defensive security, it's not just me defending myself, but also me being able to be offensive, like to be able to attack and to be able to respond in a way that can also scare my adversaries. So offensive security is another important thing. That's why having or doing exercises like, red teaming and blue teaming and purple teaming are so important.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many people on the call would be familiar with this, but I know that...
Let's do a poll, like how many people are familiar with offensive security? Raise your thumbs up. Have you guys heard that before?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see a few people. Great. So I think I've given you a bit of details on that, but happy to take many more questions.
Yeah. I was just going to comment that it's interesting, the recent announcement, the cybersecurity announcement from the federal government allocated money, and it was interesting, a part of that allocation was specifically around the Australian Signals Directorate developing an offensive capability, which is...
Exactly.
And it was a significant amount of money, and obviously, that's quite a shift in the thinking that's been going on in that area.
Correct.
I have a couple more questions, and maybe this one touches a little bit around budgets, but there was recently a survey came out with CISOs, information security officers, chief information security officers, for those that sometimes we all get caught up in our acronyms, that they want to spend more money on cybersecurity. But then when they surveyed the businesses were saying they're actually looking to decrease their cybersecurity budgets. What are your thoughts on this? What are you seeing?
To be honest, I love this question. This is like the juice of the conversation, because it is not just because of COVID they want to spend more money. Like traditionally in our industries, the chief information security officers always had a little bit of an issue asking the board for money. And that was not because they're not good at doing their work. They're absolutely amazing at doing their work. It was in function of the fact that they did not know how to articulate the risks associated to cyber in financial terms to the board. So the board would understand what they're actually paying for, right? So that was one of the things that I have discovered, is that the moment a CISO or an information security professional goes to the board and asks for money, if they know how to translate it in a language that resonates with the board would not say no, because obviously the board needs to protect their own obligations. They need to protect their own, requirements. So they would not say no just for the sake of saying no. They would rather say no if they don't understand what they have to spend money. Now, with COVID, that whole situation is shifting because everybody needs to save. It's not going to be just the CISOs that need to save. It's going to be the CIOs. It's going to be everybody, the CEOs. They would need to save money for the business to be able to be resilient from a business perspective, and also for the business to be profitable. So as a consequence, one way to skin the cat and one way to actually become a more effective CISO that asks for the right type of money is to be able to communicate to the board, but also be able to say, I am going to be a transformational CISO. I'm going to use everything that I have, all the resources that I have, and I'm going to make sure that I understand what I have. How can I optimize it? So start thinking optimization, right? Start thinking, how best can I use my resources? And actually, I'm going to bring something from personal development to the conversation, because I've been following Tony Robbins over the years. And one thing that really stood out for me is when Tony Robbins says, do not worry about the resources, worry about how resourceful you are. So resourcefulness comes up to be much better than actually having the actual resources, right? So I invite the CISOs that I work with to actually become resourceful, think about how they can do better. But another point that I wanted to tell you, for two of the participants on the call, I'm actually offering one session, one-on-one, 1 hour session on how to ask for money to the board. And I'm going to do that personally, maybe using one of my senior executive consultants to do that. But that's something I'm very, very happy to do, because it's one of my passions to, teach people on how to do that.
Well, be careful what you say, because I've already getting private messages from people taking you up on your offer.
I'm happy to serve. By the way, I saw a few messages in the chat.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions that you want?
No, they're mainly around copies of the presentation. Oh, there is a question here. Is there any recommendation on how to deal with things we usually do not consider as sensible, as is really like test environments, local documents, and some less important things? We usually overlook servers and forget the small things.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And unfortunately, for many organizations that have not been traditionally focusing on security, that is the case. Like, you're not alone. So first of all, test environment is very important, because in some instances, actually many instances, I have seen people putting real data in their test environment, which means that data then becomes a target. So test environment is very important. And overlooking other servers, that would always depend upon whether or not your applications on those servers, or the data on those servers, or those servers themselves are connected to other critical systems within the organization. Because if they are, then they are not important. They are important, because obviously they represent an access to those particular other critical systems that you have internally. So my recommendation would be to always do the basics right, which is find out your data,
yes,
classify your data, and then think of how you're going to protect it. So as soon as you know what kind of data you have where, you know how to protect it. But also think about identity, because see, we have been thinking in our industry for a very long time of about building walls, creating walls around the perimeter. Like, this is my perimeter, these are my 10 systems, 20 systems, 10,000 systems. I'm gonna build a wall around it, and I'm gonna build a bigger wall, bigger, larger. Now that has completely changed, obviously, over the last few years. And now we have the identity. The person is the actual perimeter. So how am I going to protect that new perimeter? There are many different ways to do it. One way can be obviously microsegmentation, microsegmenting based on identity, and all that kind of funky stuff that you can do with the different solutions that we offer. But then potentially and eventually it will come down to how well you have done your background work. How well do you understand your data that you have? How well do you understand the connections and the data flows within your organization to then be able to meaningfully protect them? I don't know, have I answered the question?
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think, in fact, with that question, it brings us to a close. We have gone a little bit over time.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's good, because we had lots of questions. And of course, it would be remiss if I didn't remind our members on the call that the SSAM network that ABSIA helped to jointly develop with the ATO is a part of one of the ways you can increase your resilience. And so I would encourage everyone to sort of look closely at that if they haven't already. I want to thank Gagana for what's been a really interesting presentation today. Obviously, we can tell that from the number of questions that will come in. For those people that are interested in Gagana's generous offer, and we've already had several people respond that they want to take that up, I would encourage you to do so quickly before they run out. And I'd like to thank her today for her presentation. Thank everyone for participating and joining us today. Thanks for that.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone. We'll get in touch with everyone that has asked about the sessions and let you know what is happening there and get you in touch with Gagana. So I'd like to thank you all for joining as well, and have a great rest of your days.